And we will go ahead and get started. I'll continue to let people in as they come. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm Joy Warland, and I'm the consultant for continuing education in small and rural libraries at the Department of Libraries. And I am very excited to have guest presenter Rachel Ivy Clark here this morning for this workshop. It's called True Value, Exploring Library Labor Through Design. So I first learned about Rachel through an article in American Libraries magazine, and in that article she wrote about the concept of invisible labor, defined as underpaid, unrecognized, and undervalued work. Sound familiar to anybody in the library world? So she applied this concept to library work, and drawing the conclusion that when a library is thriving, the work that makes that possible is often invisible. So, we've all had that when our trustees think the library is going great and they don't realize how much work we're putting into it to make it look like everything's going great. So the article also discussed the True Value Calculator, which is a design-based interactive tool developed by Clark and her research team at Syracuse University. And the tool aims to surface the large amounts of labor performed by library workers, and which we've started, and we have shared this calculator with all of you through our digest and listservs. So maybe some of you have actually done some work with it, but she'll talk to us more about that today. There will be some time for Q&A at the end. If there's something that comes up during the presentation, go ahead and write it in the chat. I'll be monitoring that and get in touch with Rachel either after or in real time if it seems topical. And so before I turn it over to Rachel, I'm just going to read a brief bio of her. So, formerly the cataloging librarian at the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, Rachel Ivy Clark is currently an assistant professor at the Syracuse University School of Information Studies. Her research focuses on the application of design methodologies and epistemologies to facilitate the systemic, purposeful design of library services and education. Her multiple award-winning dissertation argues that librarianship is more appropriately viewed as a design field rather than a scientific one. She holds a BA in creative writing from California State University, Long Beach, an MLIS from San Jose State University, and a PhD from the University of Washington. So with that, I'm going to welcome Rachel and take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Joy. And I'm just giggling a little bit because when I first learned the word epistemology, I actually had to write it on the pronunciation on my arm to be able to have conversations about it. And then, 5 years later, I wrote a dissertation with that word in the title. So I feel you.
Laugh at myself. I practiced it this morning, actually. I think I was like working too hard to do it. And then I actually thought about, what if I just let that word out? But anyway, I'm glad that you know what it is and are an expert on it, and that very glad that you're here to share your knowledge and experience with us. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. One thing I do want to say is I do have a couple of little interactive things I'm going to ask people to do later on. So if everyone can just make sure they have maybe a scrap piece of paper and a pencil, that's all we'll really need. But I will ask you to write some things down. But thank you, Joy, for the introduction. And I'm going to talk today about a project I worked on with a couple of students at the Syracuse University iSchool, Katerina Stanton, Alexander Grimm, and Bo Zhang, who all helped to develop this new interactive library calculator that we were aiming to surface more of this invisible labor of libraries. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of how we started, where we got the idea from, some of the design perspectives that we brought to this project that led us to where it is. And then I want to sort of wrap it up with a couple of little design activities just to get your creative juices thinking about how you might be able to bring some of that design work to your own library or your own sort of role. So basically where we started, I was encountering a lot of artifacts from libraries that were really advocating for the value of libraries. And I think we all know that libraries are really under pressure in our sort of contemporary society to kind of keep justifying, why are libraries important? Why do they matter? Why should you give them money? Why should you give them time? Why should you give them resources? And I mean, I think we all know we should just give libraries resources because libraries do good stuff. I feel like we should just be able to end the conversation there and go on with our day. But unfortunately, our current society doesn't function like that. The way it does function, especially in the US, is really rooted in economics, at least one of the major ways. So this idea that what is the value of libraries? Well, let's quantify it and put a dollar value on it. So I kept seeing these really interesting ideas. The one in the upper right here is a receipt, right? It's your circulation receipt. You check out books in the library, it tells you when they're due. But in this case, it also says, oh, hey, you checked out this cookbook and a couple of other books, and you just saved $73 by checking them out from the library instead of buying them. I mean, that's pretty cool, right? I've got no beef against that. I've also seen some other tools. This library value calculator is from the American Library Association's website, and they were inspired by one made in Massachusetts, where you would input sort of the number of books you borrowed, the ebooks you downloaded, things like that. And then it would also do a similar thing as that receipt, where it would say, oh, for the every time you borrow a book, the average cost of a book is $20. You borrowed 2 books, your library visit was worth $40. So it's really rooted in this economic space. But my concern was I was a cataloger in my background, so I know about a lot of the work that goes into making books available. And it's more than just the price of that book, right? It's more than just the retail cost. So yeah, if the average retail cost of a book is $20, that's great, but it doesn't include all the time spent to process it, to put it on the shelf, to make it available, to connect someone to it at the reference desk or through Reader's Advisory. So I kept seeing these calculators and these receipts pop up, and I'm like, but where's the labor? What about all the stuff, the work that librarians do to make those materials accessible? And really, on those receipts and in that calculator, by not showing the labor, it makes it disappear. It says the only value that we're seeing in the library is the value of the books, of the DVDs, of those physical items, the resources themselves. And as a profession, I'm sure you've all encountered this, there's a big struggle where it's like libraries aren't just books. They never have been, but especially now, right? Libraries are more than just the resources. But by only showing the resources on these calculators, I felt like libraries were really doing themselves a bit of a disservice. So we started sort of saying, where's the labor in this? What's missing here? My background, wasn't formally trained in design, but I worked at a design library and I did a lot of design work in my youth. And so I always bring a design perspective when I'm encountering a problem. Now, I want to unpack a little bit what I mean by design here, because it's a word that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So you can see on the left side, right, we think of design, sometimes we think of it as applied professional fields like fashion design or graphic design, software design, architecture, these fields that are really design based. Some folks, I don't know if anyone in here maybe is familiar with design thinking, sort of a process that's emerged out of these design fields that says, okay, how do designers actually do their work? How do designers come up with new ideas, new buildings, new clothing, things like that? So I've got some of the stages of design thinking in here. Some folks might have encountered design through the lens of UX, user experience, trying to design interactions that people desire, that make people happy, that make people successful. Participatory design, this idea of working together with the folks that you're designing for, the community that you want to build something for. These all fit under what I call sort of the big umbrella of design. I call these individual instances sort of like little d design, and this big umbrella, big D design. So when I'm saying I come from a design approach, I'm really talking about this big D design. What are all the theories and the principles, and I'm even going to use that big word, epistemologies, right, that unite all of this stuff going on in design? And really what it is design as an epistemology. And by epistemology, I just mean a way of creating knowledge. That's really what that means, right? How do we create knowledge? Traditionally, in our society, but also specifically in librarianship, we've traditionally come at this from a scientific perspective, right? I mean, how many folks, my degree says library science on it. I actually argue, I think that's a bit of a misnomer. I prefer the word librarianship because it encompasses so much more than just science. Science is really this idea that knowledge comes from observing and describing the natural world. What happens? What do we see? How can we describe it? And if we can repeat it again, then we know what will happen in the future. So that's where knowledge comes from in science. This is like super generalizable. There's a lot more nuance to this, but we only have a short time today. If anyone wants to unpack this further, I'm happy to supply some more references and resources. But just sort of at a high level for today's conversation, contrast this with design. Design is actually another way of generating knowledge about the world, but it generates knowledge by making stuff, by creating new things. That's how we learn, and that's how we get new knowledge. And really, why do we make those things? Because we want to solve problems that we see in the world. And to me, this is the heart of librarianship. We all want to solve problems. We want to solve problems of connecting people with the information that they need. And they have all kinds of barriers and all kinds of problems they face. And that's our role, is creating things that solve problems that connect people with information. So I really see librarianship as very design-based and very design-focused. So let's make things that try to solve the problem. So in this case, right, what could we make that would help us maybe solve this problem of all of this invisible labor, right? So we're making stuff to solve problems. There are, again, under that big umbrella of design, there are a lot of different ways to approach this. In our particular case, we chose what's called a critical design approach. This is a specific type of design approach. It is activist, right? So it is actively seeking to change the world. It's trying to make a difference through problem solving. And it is provocative. I've always just been drawn to sort of pushing boundaries and shaking things up. So the lens of critical design really appeals to me, but it's also like, how do we sort of shake this up? How do we get people's attention by designing some kind of provocative artifact? And in this case, I was really inspired by an art project from the artist Patty Machias. She developed a website called buildapatriarchy.com. And the idea is kind of similar. There's an invoice on there. You can go in, and it's sort of designed to surface the labor of women that has often been invisibilized. So housework, childcare, things like that. And you estimate how many hours a week you spend cleaning your house or caring for your children or caring for other loved ones. You assign yourself a salary that you think is reasonable, right? It could be minimum wage, it could be more, whatever you think. And it calculates and you can print out an invoice for sort of this feminized labor. And her idea was that people would print out these invoices and send them to their representatives, send them to their congresspeople as these activist statements to say, hey, you need to support these things. You need to support more care. You need to support sort of this home labor, home economics, things like that. We are not being recognized for our work. So I was really inspired by that piece of work. And that's between that and the calculator and the receipts from the American Library Association, my brain just put those two together and said, hey, what if we made a calculator that actually included the labor costs that librarians put into this, right? How do we sort of include that value? If we have a dollar value for books, what's the dollar value for the work of the librarians? To develop this, the problem was we needed data, right? We needed to know how librarians spent their time, how much time they spent on different types of work, and how much money they made. And that is not data that's easy to find anywhere in any sort of systematically collected way. So we actually collected our own data. We did gather data from existing sources like IMLS, the Bureau of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but it wasn't nuanced enough in terms of how people spent their time. So we sent out a nationwide survey in 2019 to anyone who worked in a library that was over 18 years old could respond. We got about 1,000 usable responses back. Pretty fairly distributed academic libraries, public libraries, and we got some other libraries as well. But the other libraries, they were so different that we couldn't really aggregate them together. The demographics pretty much resembled, especially gender-wise, the typical structure of the library profession, about 80% female. We didn't get enough data to draw any conclusions about race or ethnic identity. But these are the folks who responded, and we asked them in an average week in 2019, because one of the, of course, hilarious things that happened was we were all set to deploy our survey in like the first week of March 2020. And then, I don't know, some stuff happened in the world that maybe affected the number of hours people worked per week. Maybe folks got furloughed, changed jobs, this tiny little global pandemic. So we actually asked people about an average work week in 2019. We did ask both actually to try to draw some comparisons, but our calculator is based on the data from 2019, so that our calculator is not based on data during sort of this massive time of upheaval. So we asked folks their income. We asked annual income, but if folks were paid by the hour, we asked that and we converted it into an annual income salary. We asked them about how many hours per week they worked on average. We also asked them how many hours they worked per week that they weren't paid for, so things that they did off the clock. And we asked them what types of work they did and how much time of the hours per week they worked they spent on those tasks. We ended up with about 13 different types of library work that folks could sort of mark how they spent their time: administration and management, advancement and fundraising, circulation work, collection development work, IT work, interlibrary loan, outreach, professional development, programming and events, readers advisory, reference, teaching, and technical services. We also let people, if they said that they worked some unpaid hours, we offered some suggestions because we wanted to find out how they spent that time as well. Thinking about work problems, handling emails, planning, additional professional development, working on research projects, or reading professional literature. But we also let people fill in the blank there. And so they could say how they spent their time if it didn't fit into one of those categories. So using these different work tasks, using the amount of time that folks spent on each of those tasks, and correlating it with average salaries, we were able to develop approximately how much money, how much salary would be spent to do particular types of tasks that correlated with those existing calculators. So we built this little website. I think Joy mentioned that she sent it around for folks, but you can also just pop online to truevalue.ischool.syr.edu. And it looks a little bit like this, where it's very much designed to parallel the existing calculators, where you can enter the number of books that you borrowed on your most recent library visit. You will get the material costs, and notice that they are pulled out individually, and then you will also get the labor cost. So in addition to just returning you like, okay, here's the value of your visit, one thing we wanted to do to really surface that labor is to call it out separately, to say, okay, this part of your cost, right, of your $63.31, $50 of that is the materials, the books themselves, but $13 of that is actually what it cost a librarian, a library staff, or multiple library staff together to purchase, accession, catalog, process, shelve, circulate that book to you. And we did this for all of the types of library materials that were included in that American Library Association calculator so that it would very much parallel, right? So this is, as a form of critical design, intended to be a bit provocative and intended to critique that existing calculator and point out and really make visible that it's not just materials, it's labor. And then if you do visit the calculator, you see underneath labor costs, it says labor costs include. And if you hover or click on that, it will tell you of those 13 different types of work, what types of work went into that. So in this case, things like collection management, technical services work, and so on. We also, because we know that librarians love their jargon, right? Patrons and other users of the library do not necessarily know what, for instance, technical services work means. Whenever I used to talk to folks, they thought that that meant IT work, as opposed to things like cataloging and processing and whatnot. So we include a little glossary on the website where we actually have definitions for this different types of work. So we're really trying to assign it a cost so that we can speak the same language of value that's being spoken in the library community and the US society at large. We wanted to surface not just that labor is happening, but what are all the different types of work that librarians do, right? Because librarians just sit around and read all day. Um, Obviously not. So really surfacing that, pushing back on those stereotypes that that libraries are just books. That's not true. We're trying to push back on that here, that librarians just read all day. That why do you need a master's degree to be a librarian? Isn't it just shelving books, right? Pushing back on all of those things by surfacing all of these sort of nuanced types of work and labor that go into making something as seemingly simple as a book appear on a library shelf. We did collect some user feedback and statistics. Oh, I meant to update this with our page views and sessions, and I apologize. But we do get an average of about 300 folks visiting the website per month. There's been some significant spikes since we've written a couple pieces about it. Hopefully there'll be a spike today when you all go and check it out. But one thing that I find interesting is that, you know, a lot of people go to websites, you check it out and you leave. The people are spending almost 2 minutes on this calculator is pointing out that they are spending a lot of time sort of interacting with this tool, and hopefully we can't get nuanced statistics about are they reading every definition, I don't know, but they are going to the data pages and the definitions pages and learning about some of these things. The other thing that we did include was just a short feedback form. It is optional. You don't have to complete it to use the calculator. We asked just a couple of questions like, where did you hear about this? But one of the questions we asked is, after using the calculator, how motivated are you to support your local public library? And I'm very pleased to say that the last time I downloaded the data, we had pretty much extremely motivated on a scale of 1 to 5, right? 4.8 was the average answer, that folks are motivated to support their local public library because of their interaction with this calculator, that they have learned something new that sort of has revealed to them that this is valuable and they want to support it. So I'm more than a little bit proud of that. Right, so this was something that we made to solve a problem. Was it the best thing in the world we could have made? I don't know. Was it the only thing we could have made to surface invisible labor in libraries? Absolutely not. One of the things that I love about a design approach is that there's never one right answer. There's never one best answer. There are lots of different ways to address problems. And so I want to just sort of take a minute and sort of seg into that and to talk about this design approach a little bit further. If you're familiar with design thinking at all, this might resonate with you. Design thinking being this cyclical idea where we discover a problem, often through what we call empathetic discovery, that we really want to put ourselves in other people's shoes to see what a real problem is. We're going to define that problem. Then we're going to brainstorm some ideas about what we might make to solve that problem. We might make some plans. One of the tenets of design thinking is that we brainstorm a bunch of different ideas. They could be radical, they can be unrealistic, that there is a time and a place, right? I think a lot of us, especially in libraries, a lot of folks I talk to are like, well, we can't do that. We don't have the money. We can't do that. We don't have the time. And I respect that. Those constraints are real. But we also have to recognize that there's a time and a place to be thinking about those constraints and a time and a place to dream big. And even though we have constraints, we can't close ourselves down at first with those constraints. We have to do the big dreaming first. And that might lead us to other ideas that do fit within the constraints we have, right? But if we shut it down at the beginning, we're never going to lead to something new. So that understanding that there's a time and a place for both of those things. And we actually build our thing, whatever it is, our little online calculator or other tools. And then we assess it. And it could be traditional assessment through, like I said, we had a little form, a little feedback form on our website, but also, reflection, sort of saying like, hey, we did this, what worked, what didn't, what would we do differently in the future? And there will be a future because this is a cycle. You build something, you put it out there, you get feedback on it, you recognize what's working or what's not working, you've got a new problem, right? One of the things about the design cycle is every problem that you solve is going to open up new problems. It's going to lead you to new things that need to be addressed. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. That's a feature, not a bug. That's how we make progress in the world, and that's how we get that new knowledge that I was talking about. So we use a design approach. One of the first things that you do in your design approach is to write a problem statement. Say, hey, what is the problem here? Often this could come from things like a needs assessment of your community. In my case, it came from repeated observations of those receipts and those other calculators and just talking with librarians, right? And my own experience as a librarian, that work was invisible, right? Things were being ignored. So this idea that librarians, right, what's the problem? They need a way to demonstrate the value of all the work that they do. Why? Because much of it gets invisible or gets ignored, right? So I wrote my little mini problem statement here. There's lots and lots of problems in the world. They could be our own personal problems. They could be problems that we observe with connecting folks with information. They could be problems, if we're thinking about labor, between workers and management, coworkers, lots of problems that we might see. So one thing I just wanted to give you a little taste of today is to have you all think about a problem that you see. You can work with this one that I have here, this idea that of visibilizing labor. That's totally fine. But I would also like to encourage you to just maybe we'll take 2 minutes, and with that paper and pencil that I asked you to grab, you could write your own problem statement. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to jot something down. Everyone have a problem statement written down? I can't really see anyone and I can't see the chat. I wish there was a way to do like thumbs up, thumbs down. Anyone brave enough to share theirs?
Feel free to unmute yourselves at this point. I can't do it from here, but you can unmute yourselves. You should be able to anyway. And if not, type in the chat.
Bree, I think you've got your hand up. You want to share yours? Go ahead.
Sure. I'm sorry I don't have access to the chat, or I would have typed it in. But I put, we need a way to collect authentic user experiences and stories to make a more robust picture of the library beyond traditional library statistics. Surprisingly, people love the library, but don't love to share these special moments. We need a better way to capture them.
Yeah, that's great. And by we, you mean librarians?
Well, or just even my organization. It's the royal we because I'm a solo librarian. So.
Got it. Yeah. But, I think you could even put yourself there. Like, I need a way to capture this, right? Because next we're gonna brainstorm some solutions. Having that specifics might help you think about it. And I love that. I love that you have observed that these stories exist, right? You know that you've heard them maybe anecdotally or something, but this idea of how do we capture them and leverage them as opposed to this sort of spontaneous one-offness. That's great. I love it. Thank you for sharing and thank you for being brave.
You're welcome.
Anyone else have one they want to share? Well, Bree gave us a great example. Oh, Joy, did you want to say something?
Well, I have one that I was sort of working on, but it was hard
Sure.
to get it all in just a few minutes. But
Yeah.
something along the lines of part-time library directors need a way to get more hours because it's not sustainable to fulfill all of the responsibilities of a library director in, I don't know, I didn't finish the sentence, but in 25 hours a week or something like that.
Yeah, I know I'm asking a lot for a 2-minute problem statement. I'm not looking for perfection here, but just to surface your ideas, and I think this is another great example. So you've got a specific group of folks, part-time library directors. They need a way to sort of get more hours or have more resources because all the work they need to do doesn't fit in that part-time limitation. Yeah. And I saw one pop up in the chat. Joy, can you share them out?
Yes. Library staff and volunteers need a way to encourage library trustees and boards to use the resources available to them to learn about their duties and obligations to their libraries and to the library personnel.
Oh, yeah. That's a powerful one, especially right now with some of the things that are going on with library boards. Yeah. So you've got another specific group of folks, board members and trustees, and they need a way to connect with, there are resources that exist for them, right? Handbooks, manuals, other trainings, resources from the library, so that they sort of know how they can best help contribute. Oh, that's a fantastic one. I love it.
There's another sort of not fully written out one, but the idea of finding a way to support scholarly work.
Yeah. And so one of the things, again, I know it was a sort of time limit there, but we do always want to be thinking about that because section, because that's going to add some context that's going to help us brainstorm ideas. Yes, I think we absolutely do need ways to support scholarly work, but why do we need that? What is the pressing concern? Is it that we don't currently have a repository where we can store and share work? Is it we need to support scholarly work more because folks aren't collaborating? Are they not, maybe we have a repository, but folks don't know about it. So adding that context, and again, I'm not, no pressure here because we were on a short time limit, but adding that sort of because part, you can see how that sort of helps unpack that a bit more. Yeah, go ahead.
The because here is, I think a lot of the usual sources of support are going away. Universities have less time for it, and libraries compete in some way because they give products away. So I think somehow a way to really transform libraries so that they're actually increasing the money available for arts and social work and science is a good thing.
Yeah, so we need a way to support more scholarship in an era of declining resources because funding and resources are being taken away. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yeah. Thank you all so much for sharing some really powerful problem statements here and big problems, right? That maybe you're like, oh my gosh, how are we going to solve the problem of like supporting more scholarship? It sounds really big. But I think just for this past example, we can see how adding that context in that because can help us sort of hone in and narrow our focus. Because the next thing we're going to do is how we're going to solve these problems. What are we going to make? And when I say make, right, it could be something physical. It doesn't have to be. It could be a new policy or a new procedure, could be a relationship, right? But what are we going to make to solve this problem? Now, we're not just going to make one thing, right? We have to brainstorm a bunch of different ideas. So the next thing we want to do is just, I say sketch. It doesn't mean you have to draw a picture. You can write notes, whatever you want on your little scratch paper. I want you to just brainstorm at least 3 different, because I'm being provocative here, radical ways that you might address your problem statement. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to jot down your ideas. I want quantity, not quality, right? And don't overthink it. What are the first 3 radical ideas that come to your head that could potentially address the problem that you posed? I'll give you a couple minutes for that. Everyone come up with 3 ideas? very quiet out there. I can't even see your faces. It's very challenging. Does anyone want to share one of their ideas that they came up with, just so we can hear an example of something? I saw Tiana and then Bree.
Hi.
Hi.
So my problem statement was we need a way to do a survey or gather data to solve the problems that we have. So basically to help us help patrons. So the ways that I came up to solve that were, we could outsource it to a college. In turn, we have a local college that has a polling institute. We could ask the state library for help. We could ask the city for help. Our head librarian is married to a man who designs surveys for a living. Or we could just find volunteers elsewhere somehow. Because our biggest problem is we don't have money for that.
Yeah. So I want to. This is a fantastic example. Thank you, Tiana. I want to talk about a couple of things that you surfaced in this that play into that cycle, and why design is so cyclical. First, I applaud you on the relationship building, right? That your ideas were like, who can we partner with to make this happen? That we don't have to be experts and we don't have to do it all ourselves, right? Folks aren't recognizing our labor and our value. Maybe we're not recognizing the labor and the value that other folks could contribute to us, right? In these sort of synergistic partnerships. So I love that. I noticed in your problem statement, you said we need to create a survey to gather data because we don't have any. And one thing when you're doing this kind of work is to really separate out the problem statement from that creation part. So you've sort of got a thing that you're creating embedded in your problem statement. It's not a big deal, it's not the end of the world, but I also wonder what would happen if you sort of rephrased your problem statement as we need a way to collect data. And that might open you up for a little bit more possibilities. There might be other ways that would be useful to collect data in addition to a survey. So that's something that I might encourage you to think about. And then you said something at the end that wasn't in your problem statement, because you sort of talked it through and you said, because we really don't have the money to do our own survey. And I don't recall hearing that in your problem statement before. So one thing I want to point out is just to notice how even this 3-minute brainstorming process has surfaced more concretely some details that help you better understand your problem. I think that's a good thing. That's something that this work and doing this kind of cyclical work should lead you to do, to understand your problem better so that you can address it better, which will help you understand it better so you can address it better, right? And so on and so forth. Great example, Tiana. Bree, you are next.
Okay, I was taking your radical to the next level. No, I was thinking, we're trying to collect these patron stories, and surveys are kind of boring. I think that's part of the reason that patrons don't want to do them. And so I was thinking, instead of like a photo booth, which are becoming like popular at weddings, you almost have like a story booth in which you can take kind of almost like a Mad Libs approach, in that there are like pre-statements that you could, hold up, maybe take a picture, something like that, to make it a little bit more fun and interactive. And then the other thing I was thinking of was kid journalism. We've got a lot of kids who come to the library and they need something to do. So perhaps who wants to say no to a child, especially with a camera? So maybe we could have them ask people what they like about the library.
Yes, I love it. Again, sort of that relationship building and sort of saying, like, we already have these kids who are interested in journalism and have to do these projects. Like, how could we use that to collect stories? Oh, what a lovely idea. Yeah, I see a hand, but I'm not sure whose it is.
That's Patty, I believe.
Patty.
Patty, are you able to unmute? If not, you can go ahead and type in the chat again. And in the meantime, Howard's hand is up.
Great. All right, well, Patty's typing. Maybe we'll hear from Howard.
Yeah, I was the one talking about how to pay scholars, and so the three I came up with. One is there's a public benefit, so taxpayers could pay, and the idea there might be to get the taxpayers to pay for Civics 101 courses, and that could be used to build more scholarly work in civics. Businesses, we subsidize workforce development. We have benefits for understanding what they do. So we could get them to pay us to offer programming that would get new scholarly work in their benefit. And the last one is to really share back the patron value. If people are actually benefiting from the library, maybe you could just offer to have them share some of the profits that they made out of their use of the library, which could be all sorts of things from career development to getting their business underway.
Yeah, I love it. I love this idea of building those relationships. And Howard, I can even see you and Bree maybe working together and using, I don't know if kid journalism would be appropriate in this case, but maybe the story booth to collect the stories of how the scholarship has helped them, build their careers, things like that. Yeah, I love it. We are running a little bit short of time. I do want to point out, for those of you that maybe aren't speaking up, coming up with these radical ideas, especially sort of on the fly under pressure, I think can be challenging. Some folks that I've talked to in the past are like, I can't do this. I'm not creative. I'm not going to come up with ideas. Staring at these, I purposely put these blank boxes up here because they are intimidating. They can be very intimidating to stare at these blank boxes and go, oh my gosh, I don't even know where I would start. And right, there's no such thing as an original idea in the world. I think the true value calculator is a lovely example, right? I was inspired by those existing receipts and I was inspired by Bill the Patriarchy. There's just this really, really simple technique that I love where you use either random words, or in this case, I grabbed some random images to maybe kick your brain into gear to start thinking. So instead of just looking at these blank pages, you could just I just used a random image generator on the internet and say, okay, like, here's a random image. Thinking about my problem statement, does this spark anything for me? We don't really have time today to go through and let you come up with 3 new ideas based on each one, but I just want to show you that you don't have to start from that blank slate, right? Just pulling up random images maybe could spark a new idea. Looking at what's around you, looking at what other places are doing. I call it there's no cheating in design, right? If you see something somewhere else that inspires you, write it down, make notes about it, keep track of it. It might come back to you when you're facing some of these problems and like, oh, how did someone else do this? And maybe that would work for us. Maybe it wouldn't work exactly. Maybe we need to tweak it a little bit. But definitely finding inspiration in other places. This isn't something that you have to come up with, the most original idea ever. If you come up with something new and exciting, that's fantastic. But what's more important is that you come up with something that works to address your problem in a productive way. So I did just want to point out that it can be hard to sort of try to do that cold start from scratch, but there are techniques that we can use, just something as simple as using random images for inspiration.
So Rachel,
yeah.
Patty signed out and signed back in again. I want to give her a chance to see if she can make her mic work again. And Patty,
Okay,
if not,
yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, now we can.
Okay. So my problem was about the library boards and trustees.
Right.
So my ideas are make state library grants contingent on boards doing trainings, have boards do trainings led by their library staff and maybe volunteers also. And also maybe have them shadow and learn from library staff during their workday for a whole workday.
Oh, I love that, right? Sort of doing the partnering, like Bring your board to work day. Yes, fantastic ideas. Thanks, Patty. I'm sorry about the technical hiccups for you there.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, all fantastic. I confess I like the sort of contingent, right? You know, the library is like, hey, we want to apply for this grant, but they're not going to give it to us unless y'all do this training. So make it happen. Yeah. So just a quick wrap up, right? This idea that we design all kinds of things in libraries, and really, you know, how can bringing a design perspective to libraries help us address these problems in new and successful ways? You know, people really think about design as physical things, and I really do want to, I love the examples that you all came up with today because they are so kind of policy, relationship, like very intangible designs, but designs nonetheless, right? So libraries historically have made all sorts of things, catalogs, classification systems, story times, or, you know, events, all of these things. So don't limit yourself. Again, I love the ideas that everyone's really surfaced today. And so all of these things from design that we can bring, thinking about our library work as making stuff, either those tangible things or relationships, policies, right? Actively seeking out the problems, not assuming that we know what the problems are. So constantly observing, collecting that data. And if you don't have it, right, that's a problem. And that's something that we saw surfaced here a couple times, right? If that's a barrier, then that's a problem that we need to think about addressing. So maybe we just have to take a step back and say, okay, how do we get the data to even know what some of these potential problems are? Building connections with our library users, but also our communities, like our boards, right? Like our other staff, all of these things. Being innovative and creative and divergent. Again, not looking for the most amazing original design here, but doing that sort of knowing when it's time to think big, and then knowing when it's time to say like, hey, actually we can't have a flying dragon come to story time, but maybe we could have a person dressed as one, right? Thinking big could lead you to ideas that are implementable. So not cutting ourselves off too short at the beginning. And then this cyclical idea that we're always learning, we're always, every problem that we address is going to surface new things and new ideas, just like we saw from some of our examples. We're going to try to address those. They're going to surface new things. But along the way, we're constantly improving things. We're always getting better, that we're not sort of resting on our laurels. There's no one perfect way to do things. And when we do it, we're done, right? It's always ongoing. There's no right answer. There's just better or maybe worse answers. And we learn from both. So that's sort of my short spiel for today. I know that we're close to our time limit, but I am happy to stay a little bit longer if folks have questions or comments or anything else. I will send a copy of these slides to Joy to share with everyone, so you'll have a copy of those. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
So at this point, please feel free to unmute or raise your hand, but there probably won't be as huge range of people asking, so I think we can manage it if you want to just unmute. And I did also put an evaluation link in the chat, which I'll send out as well, but if you want to grab that and fill that out, that would be very helpful. Thank you so much for this, Rachel. It was really informative, and I loved the interactive working on the exercises in real time with you and your feedback. That was great.
Thanks, Joy. I loved the examples that people gave. They even got me thinking about things that I hadn't thought about before. So thank you everyone who is brave enough to share theirs. I know that it's intimidating.
I'm not sure if you can see the chat yet, but you're getting lots of thank yous.
Oh, you're very welcome. And you know, Joy, my contact information will be in the slides. So if you have questions in the future, like I said, you want some follow-up resources, happy to provide those if you want to reach out.